My name is Michael Harris, and for the past 4 years, I've lived a life that most people my age would call wasted. I'm 29 years old, and while my friends were getting married, traveling the world, and climbing the corporate ladder, I spent my days inside a quiet house on the north side of Chicago, taking care of my mother as cancer slowly stripped her of the life she once had. I don't say that to get pity. I say it because sacrifice defines you in ways success never can. I put my career as a financial analyst on hold, turned down a promotion that would have doubled my salary, and gave up nearly every personal relationship I had, all because Mom needed me. And when you've watched the strongest woman you know weaken day by day, when you've held her hand through sleepless nights and tried to smile while she winced in pain, you learn that love isn't a word. It's an act. But not everyone in my family saw it that way. My sister, Emily Harris, is 2 years older than me, 31, and the kind of woman who always thought the world owed her something. Growing up, she was the golden child, valedictorian, homecoming queen, law school graduate. She knew how to impress teachers, charm relatives, and manipulate every situation to her advantage. When our father died 5 years ago, Emily barely stayed long enough to hug Mom before catching a flight back to New York, where she lived a fast-paced life working at a corporate law firm. She called once a month, sometimes less, usually to brag about a case she won or a vacation she was taking with whatever wealthy boyfriend she was dating at the time. When Mom was diagnosed, Emily didn't move back. She didn't offer to share the burden. She didn't even visit more than twice a year. Her excuse was always the same: my career is demanding. You know, I can't just put everything on hold, Michael. That's your choice, not mine. Choice. That word still burns. Because I didn't see it as a choice. I saw it as duty. As love. As the least I could do for the woman who raised us after Dad died, who worked 2 jobs to put food on the table and still showed up at every parent-teacher conference, every baseball game, every piano recital. Mom deserved more than a cold apartment and a stranger's care. She deserved her children, her family. And since Emily was too busy, that responsibility fell to me. Every morning, I woke before sunrise to prepare Mom's medication. I made her breakfast, even on days when she barely touched it. I drove her to chemo, sat in the sterile waiting rooms, and carried her back to the car when her legs were too weak. Our house smelled of antiseptic wipes and herbal teas, and the soft beeping of the heart monitor became background noise. My life revolved around her needs, and though it was exhausting, I never regretted it. Mom used to look at me with tears in her eyes and say, "Michael, I don't know what I'd do without you." That was enough for me. Still, I'd be lying if I said I didn't hope for some acknowledgement, some validation, especially when she mentioned the future. She often said she wanted to make things right in her will, that she wanted to ensure I was taken care of after all the years I'd given up for her. "Don't worry," she whispered one evening as I tucked her into bed. "I know who's been here and who hasn't. I won't forget that." Those words kept me going, especially on the nights when I cried alone in the kitchen, silently grieving the life I'd lost. By the summer of 2024, Mom's health had declined so sharply that hospice nurses began visiting twice a week. Emily flew in then, not to help, but to circle like a vulture sensing its meal was near. She brought expensive flowers, posted photos on Instagram about being a devoted daughter, and then spent most of her visit locked in phone calls with her law firm. She didn't know how to make Mom tea, or how to help her stand without hurting her. She wasn't there for the midnight fevers or the terrifying moments when Mom couldn't catch her breath. But she knew how to perform for an audience. And our extended family, uncles, cousins, distant relatives, they ate it up. Emily, the successful lawyer, the daughter who made something of herself. Meanwhile, I was the son who never left home, as if devotion was the same as failure. The will was scheduled to be read 2 weeks after Mom's passing. By then, I was hollowed out, running on autopilot. But I still carried her words inside me. She had promised. She had told me she wouldn't forget. And for once in my life, I believed things might turn out the way they should. I imagined it, Emily receiving something modest, maybe a token gesture, while I inherited the family home and the savings Mom had built with Dad. Not because I wanted wealth, but because it was fair. Because it was right. Because sacrifices deserve recognition. As the day of the reading approached, I let myself hope. But hope is a dangerous thing. It blinds you. It whispers sweet lies in your ear. And it makes the knife cut deeper when betrayal finally comes. The night before the will reading, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake in my old bedroom, staring at the ceiling where faint cracks traced crooked paths like spiderwebs. This house held every memory I had. Birthday mornings with pancakes, Christmas mornings with Dad humming carols, late nights studying for finals with Mom checking in to bring snacks. It wasn't just four walls and a roof. It was the story of my life. Tomorrow, that story would be handed down, written into paper, sealed into law. I kept replaying Mom's last weeks in my mind. The way she would squeeze my hand, the soft gratitude in her voice whenever I tucked her in, the whispered promises that I wouldn't be forgotten. For the first time in years, I let myself believe I might finally step out from under Emily's shadow. It was just after midnight when I went downstairs for water. The house was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator. My footsteps echoed against the hardwood, and I almost turned back when I noticed the light under Mom's study door. No one had used that room since she passed. I hesitated, hand on the knob. Emily was in town, staying at a hotel downtown. At least, that's what she'd said earlier at dinner, sitting across from me with her perfect hair and smug little smirk. She'd clinked her wine glass against mine and said, "Tomorrow's a big day, little brother. Let's try to make it civil, okay?" Civil. That was her word for everything. Cold, clinical, detached. But when I pushed the door open, the last person I expected to see was her. Emily sat at Mom's old oak desk, the soft glow of the desk lamp illuminating her sharp profile. She had her laptop open, papers spread across the surface. And sitting beside her was a man I recognized instantly. Charles Benson, the family lawyer who had handled our affairs since before Dad died. My heart froze. Neither of them noticed me at first. Emily was pointing at something on her screen, her voice hushed but urgent. "It's airtight, Charles. He won't be able to contest it." I made sure everything lines up perfectly with Mom's signature history. Charles adjusted his glasses, glancing nervously at the door. "Emily, forging a will is—" "Don't use that word," she snapped. "It's not forgery. It's correction. Michael's been freeloading for years. Mom never wanted him to waste his life in this house. She wanted her legacy to mean something, and I can give it value. He can't." I felt the blood drain from my face. Freeloading. That was how she described my sacrifice. 4 years of bathing our mother, carrying her up the stairs when her legs gave out, giving up my career, my friends, my future, that was freeloading to her. Charles lowered his voice. "If he finds out—" "He won't," Emily interrupted. "Tomorrow, the will gets read. He'll sulk, maybe throw a tantrum, but legally? He won't have a leg to stand on. And once I have the house and the accounts, I'll buy him out of whatever little emotional claim he thinks he has. He's weak, Charles. Always has been." Her words cut deeper than any knife. I stepped back into the hall, my pulse pounding so hard I could barely hear. Every nerve in my body screamed to burst in, to confront her, to expose the venom dripping from her lips. But years of swallowing my pride, of controlling my emotions, had taught me restraint. I needed proof. Silently, I pulled out my phone. I hit record and leaned just far enough inside to capture their voices, their faces, their damning conversation. The glow from the lamp cast Emily's expression in sharp relief. Smug, calculating, utterly convinced of her victory. "By the time the rest of the family knows," she said, closing her laptop with a snap, Michael will already be out of the picture. I'll handle the estate, and he can go back to whatever dead-end job he can scrape up. It's better this way. Better. The word rang in my ears long after they packed up their papers and slipped quietly out the back door. When the house was silent again, I stood there in the dark study, staring at the empty desk. My mother's scent still lingered faintly on the fabric of her chair, lavender lotion and peppermint tea. The woman who had told me I wouldn't be forgotten. The woman whose signature, whose very wishes, Emily had stolen. For a long time, I couldn't move. My hands shook so violently that I had to grip the edge of the desk just to stay upright. I wanted to scream. I wanted to smash something, to wake up the whole neighborhood and let the world know what she had done. But I didn't. Instead, I remembered every lesson my mother had ever taught me about patience, about choosing your moment, about integrity being stronger than anger. So I saved the recording. I backed it up twice, once to the cloud and once to an encrypted hard drive I kept for work. Then I sat at the desk, staring at the blinking cursor on my laptop, and began piecing together the plan that would define the rest of my life. Emily thought she had won. Tomorrow, she would walk into that law office with her head high, ready to gloat as she stripped me of everything. But tomorrow, she would learn that betrayal doesn't end with silence. It ends with exposure. And when the truth came crashing down on her, it would be in front of every relative, every lawyer, every witness she thought she had fooled. For the first time in years, I felt a strange, dangerous calm settle over me. The kind of calm that comes not from peace, but from certainty. I wasn't going to fight her in private. I was going to destroy her in public. Morning came heavy, like the weight of a storm pressing down before the thunder breaks. I hadn't slept a single hour. Instead, I sat in Mom's study through the night, the dim desk lamp painting shadows across the old bookshelves while I replayed Emily's words on loop. Freeloader. Weak. Out of the picture. She had rewritten not just the will, but the story of my life. To her, everything I had done was nothing more than wasted time. But if she thought I was going to walk quietly into the grave she dug for me, she hadn't learned a single thing about the brother she dismissed. I started with the recording. Listening back to Emily and Charles whispering over their scheme felt like swallowing glass, but it was the foundation of everything I needed. Her voice was sharp, commanding. His was timid, compliant. Together, they had nailed my coffin shut, until I pried it back open with evidence. But one recording wasn't enough. Courts, lawyers, family, they would need more than a snippet of conversation. I needed to build an iron wall of proof that no smug smile, no clever excuse could climb over. So I dug. First, I searched through Mom's desk drawers. She had always been meticulous, the kind of woman who labeled file folders by color and date. Insurance papers, medical records, property deeds, all carefully arranged. And then I found them, 2 wills. One dated 4 years ago, one just 6 months old. The one from 6 months ago bore Mom's familiar scrawl, shaky but authentic. My name was clear. Executor of the estate, equal beneficiary alongside Emily. It wasn't about money. It was about trust, about recognition of the years I had given up. But the second will, the one with a more recent date, stamped just 2 weeks before her death, was wrong. The handwriting mimicked hers, but something about it felt off. Too neat. Too polished. And at the bottom, her signature was a lie. My stomach turned. Emily hadn't even bothered to destroy the real one. She left both, maybe confident I'd never dare look. I scanned both documents into my laptop, carefully labeling them. Then I opened Mom's email archives, which I still had access to from managing her care. There, buried in a string of unread newsletters, was an email exchange with Charles. Subject: Draft Revision. The attachment was a PDF, a draft will almost identical to the forged one, except the date was blank. The pieces were falling together like jagged glass in a mosaic of betrayal. But I wasn't a lawyer. I needed someone who could turn this evidence into a weapon sharp enough to cut through Emily's lies. So I called Daniel Reyes. Daniel had been my closest friend since college, though we drifted when my world shrank to caregiving. He was a junior partner now at a law firm across town, sharp-minded and relentless. When he picked up, his voice was groggy, but the moment I told him what I'd found, the sleep fell away. "You're saying your sister and your mother's lawyer rewrote the will?" he asked. "I'm saying I have a recording of them admitting it, 2 conflicting wills, and a draft email that proves Charles helped her." There was a pause. Then, "Michael, do you understand how big this is?" "I understand I have less than 12 hours before Emily tries to bury me." Daniel didn't hesitate. "Send me everything. I'll meet you at the office before the reading." For the first time since I overheard Emily, a flicker of hope cut through the haze of rage. But hope wasn't enough. I wanted her humiliated. I wanted her arrogance shattered in front of every aunt, uncle, and cousin who had spent years singing her praises. So I spent the rest of the morning preparing not just the evidence, but the presentation. I printed copies of both wills, highlighting the differences in language. I clipped the email thread, noting the attachment date. And then, I took the recording, enhanced the audio, and synced it with closed captions so that no one could claim they misheard. It wasn't just going to be a rebuttal. It was going to be a show. By noon, Daniel arrived. He looked sharp in a navy suit, briefcase in hand, but his expression softened when he saw me. "You look like hell," he said. "I feel worse." "Then let me do the talking. Just sit back and let the truth do the work." We went over everything twice, then again. Daniel had a mind like a steel trap, locking every detail into place. He explained how the will reading would proceed, how Charles would present the forged version, and how Emily would play her part with crocodile tears and false humility. And then, he smiled in a way that reminded me of the Daniel I'd known years ago, the one who never lost a debate. "When we pull the rug out, it won't just be a stumble. She's going to fall flat on her face." That was exactly what I wanted. The hours leading up to the meeting stretched thin. I showered, dressed in the only suit I owned, and sat in silence with Daniel while the clock ticked. My nerves buzzed like live wires, but underneath, there was a cold steadiness. Emily thought I was weak. She thought I would sulk, maybe beg, maybe lash out like a child. She had no idea that weakness dies the moment you stop fearing loss. By the time we walked into Benson and Rowe, attorneys at law, I was ready. The conference room smelled faintly of leather and stale coffee. A long mahogany table gleamed under the overhead lights. Relatives were already gathered, Aunt Clara in her pearls, Uncle Henry fiddling with his watch, cousins whispering in the corner. And then Emily swept in, wearing a black dress that looked more like cocktail hour than morning. She kissed Aunt Clara's cheek, offered a pained smile to the room, and finally glanced at me with the kind of look you save for a fly on the wall. "Michael," she said smoothly, "I wasn't sure you'd show." I met her gaze, calm, steady. Wouldn't miss it. She had no idea that by the time this meeting was over, the mask she wore so effortlessly would be ripped away in front of everyone she thought she controlled. I wasn't here to fight. I was here to end her. The room settled into silence when Charles entered, clutching a sleek folder against his chest. His eyes darted nervously toward Emily, then flicked past me like I wasn't worth the air in the room. He cleared his throat, gesturing for everyone to take their seats around the long mahogany table. "This is a difficult day for all of us," he began, his tone oily and rehearsed. "Your mother was a remarkable woman. It is my solemn duty to carry out her final wishes." Emily folded her hands delicately on the table, her expression a perfect picture of sorrow. She even dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, though I noticed the corner of her lips twitch upward when Charles slid the forged will from his folder. He cleared his throat again. As per the most recent revision of Margaret Lawson's last will and testament, dated 2 weeks before her passing, the following allocations have been made. The words spilled out like acid. Property. Savings. Investments. The lake house. Every asset carefully listed, every one sliding into Emily's grasp. And as for Michael Lawson, Charles paused, his voice dripping with false regret. Your mother felt that your years of dependence had already been supported by her generosity. Therefore, no additional assets are to be transferred to you. A murmur rippled around the room. My relatives glanced at me with a mix of pity and disdain. To them, it looked like confirmation of what Emily always whispered behind my back, that I was the weak one, the burden, the nothing. Emily pressed the tissue to her lips, feigning a tremble. Then, almost too softly for anyone else to hear, she whispered, "It's for the best, Michael. You'll understand one day." That was the moment I had been waiting for. I leaned back, letting the silence thicken until all eyes turned toward me. My voice, when I spoke, was calm. Too calm. Charles, before you close that folder, I think everyone here deserves to see something. After all, transparency was one of Mom's greatest values. Wouldn't you agree? Confusion flickered across his face, but Emily jumped in smoothly. Michael, this isn't the time. You've embarrassed yourself enough already. I didn't answer her. Instead, I reached into my briefcase and slid 2 folders onto the table with deliberate precision. Daniel, seated beside me, clicked his laptop awake and angled the screen toward the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," Daniel said, his voice steady and sharp, "what you've just been presented with is not Margaret Lawson's final will. It is a forgery." The room erupted in gasps and whispers. Charles paled, his fingers tightening on his folder. Emily sat bolt upright, color draining from her face. "That's absurd," she snapped. "You're grasping at straws." "Really?" I said softly. I opened the first folder, pulling out the will signed 6 months earlier, Mom's handwriting shaky but unmistakable. This was my mother's last authentic will. Equal division between Emily and me, with me named executor. The signature matches every check, every letter she wrote in her final year. Daniel held up the second document. And this, he tapped the forged version Charles had just read, was dated 2 weeks before her death. Curiously, the signature is smooth, almost mechanical. Convenient, isn't it, given her condition at the time? She could barely hold a pen. Emily's jaw tightened, but before she could speak, Daniel clicked the laptop, and the room filled with the crackling sound of my recording. Emily's voice echoed, cold and unmistakable, "Don't worry, Charles. Michael won't fight this. He never fights. Just make sure the new will leaves him nothing. I want him gone." The words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Every head in the room swiveled toward Emily. Her face flushed crimson, her composure cracking under the weight of 100 judging eyes. That's fake," she stammered. "He doctored that." Daniel leaned forward, eyes like steel. "The file contains the original audio metadata. Untouched. Authentic. And here," he clicked again, pulling up Mom's email thread with Charles. "This draft was sent from Charles's account. The attachment? An early version of the forged will, and signed at the time. The timestamp doesn't lie." Charles's mouth opened and closed like a drowning man. I can explain." But no explanation could cover the sweat beading on his forehead, the way his hands shook as he clutched the folder tighter. Emily slammed her palms on the table. "This is a setup. He's jealous. He's always been jealous." She whirled on me, her eyes burning. "You couldn't stand that Mom loved me more. So you twisted everything to make me look like the villain." I met her fury with silence, letting her desperation dig her own grave. The relatives shifted uncomfortably, their earlier pity curdling into disgust. Aunt Clara, once Emily's loudest defender, spoke first. Margaret adored Michael. We all knew it. She never would have cut him out. Another cousin chimed in. And forging your own mother's will? Emily, how could you? The tide had turned. Daniel closed the laptop with finality. Given the evidence, this matter will be escalated to the court for fraud and malpractice. Charles, as the officiating lawyer, your license will be under review. Emily, as the instigator, you face charges that could result in both criminal penalties and civil restitution. The silence that followed was deafening. Emily's eyes darted around the room, searching for an ally, but found none. Every gaze that met hers was sharp with betrayal. She sank back into her chair, trembling, the mask she had worn for years finally stripped away. I stood slowly, feeling the weight of 100 emotions, grief, anger, vindication, crashed together in my chest. But when I spoke, my voice was steady. Mom raised us to believe that family was everything. I gave up years of my life to care for her, not because I wanted her money, but because she was my mother. And you, I turned to Emily, my words cutting through her silence, you turned her death into a transaction. You tried to erase me from her memory. But you forgot one thing, Emily. Mom knew me better than you ever did. I placed my hand on the authentic will, my mother's shaky signature staring back at me. And she trusted me to protect her wishes. No one spoke. Emily's shoulders collapsed inward, her eyes burning holes into the table. Charles gathered his papers with trembling fingers, his career dissolving before his eyes. The meeting adjourned in chaos, but I walked out with calm steps. Outside, the afternoon sun spilled across the pavement, warm and blinding. For the first time in years, I felt lighter. Emily would face the courts. Charles would face disbarment. And me? I would finally face a life that wasn't chained to sacrifice or shadows. Revenge hadn't required shouting, violence, or rage. It had required patience, proof, and the quiet certainty that truth, once revealed, can burn hotter than fire. And as I stepped into the sunlight, I carried that truth with me, knowing Emily's empire of lies had crumbled, and I hadn't even raised my voice. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video and leave a comment telling me what you thought. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please subscribe and hit the notification bell to get alerts about new stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.